Okay, hi Ivy, hi Wayne. Hello, you can hear me clearly?
Yes,
Can you hear?
yes, we can hear you clearly. Yeah.
All right, all right.
Yes.
So my name is Joel, and I'm a developer based in Nairobi, Kenya. We'll be going through unit testing using Angular today. Let me share my screen. I prepared this small app. I don't know if you can see my browser. Are you able to see my browser?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So it's a simple app with a form and a list that is mocking up getting data from an endpoint from a service. So we'll be testing this section, the form section, and testing data that's coming from a service. So my presentation is on I compiled everything on this repo, and I will share it to anyone who is interested. Is there somewhere I can share if some is there somewhere I can share so that if someone wants to follow along, it's easy?
Yes. So you can just if you have either of our contacts, you can just DM it to us, or you can even DM it on me on Twitter, and then I can just tweet it so that anyone can just access it.
Okay, I'll share after the presentation.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Okay, so let's start by why unit test. I've come to realize that if you have a big project, if you're working on a big Angular project, unit testing is a critical part of the development process, and it has several benefits that I would like us to have a look at. I don't know if you can see, is the black too black or let me make it white.
Actually, I think I'm okay with it. Cynthia, are you okay with it?
Is this better?
Yeah, I think dark is good. What do you think,
Dark.
Cynthia?
I think Duck was working just fine.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's look at some of the benefits of having tests. One of the big benefits is it improves the design of our implementations. As developers, we at times, after getting the brief, we go ahead and start building immediately instead of thinking through the whole process, the whole user journey. And we at times get blockers that we didn't anticipate. But if you are making tests, especially if you use the TDD methodology, whereby you start by writing tests and then write code to pass the test, you'll find that you will minimize these unforeseen challenges that may come as you develop. Another benefit is that when it comes to refactoring, if you had written tests while you are building, you'll find that refactoring becomes very easy, as you'll be able to see any bug, you'll be able to notice any bug very fast, unlike someone who doesn't have tests. Another benefit is that it allows us to add new features easily without breaking things. This is as simple as that. When you're adding a new feature, you can run the test to ensure that nothing has broken. Another good benefit of having tests is that they act as a good documentation. If a new developer is joining the project, if the project is it has very good tests, it's very easy for one to get up and running very fast because all the logic is explained on the test. Another benefit is that you are confident with your work. As we will see, you'll be able to run your test before you publish or before you take your product online. So when you run the test and they pass, you will be confident that what you are pushing is bug free. It will not break anything, and yeah, that's another big benefit. Another benefit is that bugs are found easier and quicker. The same, once you run your test, you'll be able to identify the bugs very easily. There are some people who argue that having tests takes a lot of time, but I've come to realize that if you take the short time that you'll take to write the test compared to the amount of time that you'll be trying to look for bugs, resolving bugs later without test, you'll find that if you had the test, especially for very big projects, the scales of an example like Airbnb, for instance, if you have tests for a big project, you'll find that you will spend way less time solving the bugs compared to if you didn't write the tests. So for our case in Angular, there are two popular tools that the Angular community uses. One of them is Karma, and the other one is Jasmine. Once you have the link to this repo, you can click on this, and it will take you to the official Jasmine site, and you can read more about it. We'll just go through it lightly. So Jasmine is a framework for testing JavaScript code. It attempts to describe tests in a human readable format so that non-technical people can understand what is being tested. That's Jasmine. It's a framework that we use in Angular, and it's the framework that we are going to use to create the test for this meetup. The other tool that's used a lot with Angular is Karma, and Karma is a task runner for our tests. Karma is a task runner for our test. So what this basically means is that Karma lets us run Jasmine tests as part of a development tool chain, which requires tests to be runnable. and results inspected via the command line. So I'll show you exactly how this works. Once you run ng test on the command line, you'll be able to see Kama at work, and it will open a browser where you will be able to see all the tests that you've created, whether they've passed or they've failed. So for a simple demo today, this is how you create your app. If you don't have Angular installed, just type this command mp install Angular CLI, and then create your Angular app. It doesn't have to be ng unit test. It can be any name you want. And once you've done creating your Angular app using the Angular CLI, a very beneficial thing happens. I want this one. Can you see my VS Code?
No.
What are you seeing now?
I was seeing the browser.
Ooh, I want to share I want to show you the code.
Now we can see.
Okay. So once you generate your Angular app without writing any code, this is done automatically on the packet.json file. It automatically generates for you all the Jasmine and Kama files that you'll need to generate your tests. So this is everything that you need for your test, starting from Jasmine core to Kama Jasmine HTML reporter. So that's everything you need to create Angular tests. Another important file I would like us to look at is the Kama configuration file. On the Kama configuration file, we specify the framework, and in our case, we are going to use Jasmine as our testing framework. We specify the reporters, and then we set AutoWatch to true. This means that if you change any test and save the file, the tests are rebuilt and relearn. Sorry, the tests are rebuilt and rerun. Hey, rerun and rerun automatically. So that word. And another important thing I wanted us to look at on the Kama configuration file is the browser section. This is where you set up the browser that you want to run your test on. By default it's Chrome, but if you use Safari, Mozilla, you can set all that up. So the Kama file is this one, kamaconfig.js. So Jasmine frameworks. This is where you set up the frameworks. I hope you can see this. This is where you set up Jasmine, and then you set up the reporters. AutoWatch, you set it to true so that once you save, it automatically reloads and reruns the tests. And then this is where you set up the browser. For our case, I love Chrome, so I'll be using Chrome. Another file that's important for testing is the test entry file. The Angular CLI configuration of Karma uses the file test.ts as the entry file of tests for our applications. So this file is this one here, tests.ts. So what happens on test.ts? So the first thing is an environment to run Angular test is created using the imports. These imports. I hope you can see the imports. So after the environment to run Angular test is created, test bed is initialized, and then Karma loads all the test files in the application. So Karma checks for any file that has spec.ts and considers that as a test. So any file that has spec.ts, I'm sure if you've created components, ng, create ngg, that command for creating a component, we always have that spec.ts file. So any file that has that extension, Karma loads this as a test file and yeah, loads this as a test file. So those are the files that you should be aware of that are very important when it comes to testing in Angular. So the first simple test I would like us to go through is on the app component. So I've created a few simple tests on the app component. So the app component, so here we are going to, let me open the app component. So this is the app component.
Are you sharing your VS Code, Amma?
Yes.
Okay. Probably I can't see it on my end. Can anyone see VS Code? Amma, oh, are you working on the browser or the VS Code?
I'm on the VS Code now.
Okay.
So I'm switching between the browser and the VS Code. The browser is my slides, and then practicals on the VS Code. Okay. So on the app component, we will first import all the Angular testing tools that we'll be using for this specific component. And then we import all the dependencies that the component has. And then we use describe to start our test block. And then we will use async before each. And the purpose of the async is to let all the possible asynchronous code to finish before continuing. So let me show you this. For importing all the Angular testing tools, this is where we import the Angular testing tools. This is the describe I was talking about. and then this is the async I'm talking about. So after defining this section, this is the first auto-generated test when you are creating an Angular, when you are creating an app, an Angular component. This test will be created automatically. This basically tells us that once it runs, it tells us that the component has been initialized. And to see this test in action, you run let me delete this and then start it. You run ng test. When you run ng test, it will. So this is camera track, and it will show you how many tests have passed, how many have failed. So all our tests have passed for now. We'll go through the other tests, but I wanted to show you simply how to run the test. So you'll run using this command ng test, and once you run it, Kama will show you the results on the command line, and also it will open for you a browser with all the tests that you had created. For our case, let me zoom this. For our case, we are still on the app component. So we are looking at this task. We are looking at this test should create the app. So this means that this is the test that checks to see that the app has been initialized. So let's have a look at the other two tests on the app component. So the second test this test here, this test, this test will be checking this. For this test, this test will be checking that we'll be checking to see that this Angular unit testing is displayed on our template, on our HTML. So on the component, we have this Angular unit testing defined on the TS file, and then we want to test and check that once it runs, it is displayed on our HTML. Let me show you. When you come back to the app component, this is the TS file, and this is where we define the Angular unit test. And now we want to test that once we run this component on the HTML. Let's minimize this. On the HTML, this title, the text that will be generated here will be Angular unit testing. So if we run this app, we see that on the browser, we get Angular unit testing. So the welcome is here, welcome to Angular unit testing. So welcome to title, and this title we've defined it on the TS file here. Are we together?
Yeah.
All right. So if we check the test, we can see that the title is Angular unit testing. So the test has passed. But if we change something, let's say we change like maybe someone was typing dir on the terminal and then he misspelled it. So we misspelled the title. Once we run the test, what we'll be getting on the template is different from what is defined in the test. And so what we expect is that the test will fail. And when you check on the test, you can see that it's expecting welcome to Angular unit testing, not welcome to Angular unit testing dir. So this is what I was saying, that this is where I was saying that if you make any mistake, it will be very quick to notice if you had written the test. Because like for this instance, you know exactly where the problem is, and once you change it to the expected value, the test should run successfully now. So that's our second test on the app component. So this is the second, this is the third. There are three. So the third, the third checks that the DOM renders the text property, and it also checks that the property rendered is inside a h1 tag. So the first one checks that the text is correct, and the second one checks that the DOM renders the text property. All right. So that's the app component. So that's where what we are covering here is testing elements in a component. So the other sections, the other section I want us to look at is you will find that in almost every project you'll work on, you'll always have a form, and I'd like us to look at some tests that we can run when working with forms. So similar to the other section, we are going to import Angular, the Angular testing tools, but now we'll introduce by that will allow us to select elements from the DOM. Similar to the previous instance, declare. We'll use declare to create the text. We'll use describe to declare the text block, the test blocks. So by test blocks, I mean, you see, for this instance, this grant list component, this is one test block. For app component, this is another test block. For grant ads component, this is another test block. So for this section, we are looking at these tests in this grant add component. So let's look at VS Code. So for grant add component, so this is the section where this is a form that we'll be using. This is the form that we'll be using to add a grant. And it has 3 entries: the name, the grantor, and the amount. So on the browser, this is the form I'm talking about. So to add a grant, you'll add the name, grantor, and the amount. So you want to test to see to only submit when the form is valid. Yeah, and the other tests are here. Let's start from the beginning. So similar to the previous instance, we are importing the testing tools, and the by I was talking about is, this we import by from Angular platform browser. It will help us select elements from the DOM. And then this is where we declare the tests block. And then for this instance, we'll need to set all the needed dependencies before we start the test. And dependencies, I mean all the modules, all the components, and if there is a service in the next section, we are going to also look at a service. So in this section, the dependencies are a component and these 3 modules. For similar to the other test, the first test expect the component to be initialized. So once it's initialized, this one will be successful. The second test expect the component instance has the expected value text, the expected value of the text property. So similar to the tests that were in the app component, we are also testing that we are also testing to see this text on our component once it's initialized. And if this test is not initialized or there is a typo, this test will fail. So similarly to the other instance, this text is initialized on the TS file. Let me show you on the TS file here. This is where we've initialized the text that we want to test on the template. Where are the tests? So that's the second test. The third test expects the property of the component submitted to be true when onSubmit function is called. So for this test, we are testing that this function that we've set it by default it's false. When the component is initialized, the onSubmit returns false. But we are testing that once the form is saved, the onSubmit changes from false to true. I hope I'm clear. So this is where you will add, if you want to hit a endpoint, this is where you will also add that function down here. But for our test, I wanted to make it simple. We are only testing that once we click the save button, the onSubmit returns true. So that's the third test. The fourth and the fifth test, we are going to check the validity of the form. So we are going to check that the validity that we've set up here while creating this form, we are going to test that they work, they run well. That if the grantor is an empty string, the name is an empty string, the amount is an empty string, it returns false. And if the values are provided correctly, it returns a valid, it returns true if the correct values are passed. So this is where we've set up the controls for the form. And on the TS, you can see for the form control name, we are checking that the control name is required and the minimum length is 4. For the grantor, it's the same. And for the amount, you have to provide the amount for the form to be valid. So those are the 3 controls that we have, and these are the tests that we run to make sure that we've defined the controls correctly. So, and once we run ng test, you can see them here. So so this is the test for on submit. On submit, it returns true. This is the test that checks if a form is valid. This is the test that checks that the component is initialized. This is the test that checks that this text is generated, or this is invalid and this is valid. So this is what I mean. So we can give an example. Name, let's say COVID masks. The grantor is US aid, and the amount 1,000. So all the tests are successful.
Quick question, Joel.
Yeah.
So does this happen before? Does the test run before you click on the button, or does it run after you click on the button? Like, when does the test pass and when does it fail in this particular case with this component?
For this ones, they run when you run ng test. Let's, like right now I've stopped. No tests are running now. Let's test. Let's try and make one test fail. Let's change this add grant. We are expecting this add grant page. Let's change. Let's where we define that? If there's a typo here, and then you run the tests, that's one example. It was expecting page, but we passed pages. So that one will fail. That's one example. We passed page dir. Another example could be maybe you don't want the grant name, you want the grant title. But you have to change this here too. You updated from grant name to grant title as the property of a grant instead of grant name, but you've not updated the test. So you have to update here too. Title. I was expecting this to fail. So on the test, we are expecting the name, but on the code you've used title. It has passed. Why has it passed? But I had such a problem. I had defined an object differently. I had used a different object on the tests from the component, and the test failed. I don't know.
Okay,
We'll
so
get...
okay, no problem. So I think my question was more of so you see the way if you go to the test file, spec.ts file, you had a section where it was checking on if the form has been submitted, if it stands to be true, right? So where the third test expects the property of the component submitted to be true when the onSubmit function is called. So this, as we can say, like this is a test, right? So
yes.
Does this fail during the first ng test run, or because of course when you write when you type in ng test, right? The submitted is false, right?
Yes.
And it will only be true if it's if someone clicks on puts in all the information and then clicks on submitting the form, right? So does when you run it without clicking on that particular button, you haven't put anything inside the form, does the test is it successful, or how is it? Because I'm trying to really understand that part. Like, when does it say successful? When the form has been submitted, and the form is only submitted. I mean, the boolean turns to true when the form has been submitted. So when does the test actually pass and say like, oh, the form has actually been submitted? If by default it's false.
So the test, I think you'll see it more clearly when you are testing an instance where you have a service. So what happens is the test file tries to test a running component. The component tries to mimic the component running as expected. So for so for the submit, you see here, we need to have somewhere where we are checking for a click event before it's submitted. So
then
this test it's testing this function. What's happening on the test it's testing this logic.
Or the on submit logic.
Yes. Can you see this? This is submitted is equals to true.
Oh, okay. Okay. So it expects that when that method if that method or function has been invoked, it's supposed to turn the boolean from false to true. But then when you put it, yes.
Let's see if it should fail now.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's testing. It's not changing. It's not changing. Sorry about that. It's not. The on submit function does not change. It's not changing on this example. It's not changing.
Yeah, this but I can see there's one field.
Yes. This test is testing the result of this on submit function. So this was an example. It was just a simple example. This is how it was. We wanted to see that. We wanted to see that this on submit returns are true. We wanted to see this on the spec.ts file. So that's why we have this. It expects to be truthy. I don't know if I'm.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. I'm going to add another function, another test. I think when I share, I'll test this function. Where is it? I'll be writing a test for the create form function. I have not been able to complete. I'll share that this section. This is the part where it changes from false to true on submit.
Okay.
So this is the next section. I don't have the test for that part.
Oh, okay. Sure,
it didn't run, so I'll share it.
Okay.
So that was working with a form. We've just scratched the surface. There are more things that you can do here. You can test the button. If it's taking you to another page, you can test for the routing and test which route it's taking you to and which route you are coming from. So there's a lot that we can do here, but let us leave it at that for now, and let us look at the services. Let us look at a component that has a service. So for this section, when testing a component with services, we need to add the providers to the testing module created in the before each that we've just seen. And for example, today we are going to mock a service. You don't necessarily need to have the endpoint. If you know the structure that you'll be getting, you can mock it. This is the beauty of front end. You don't have to, if let's say there is a delay with the backend guys, you can mock, you can have a mock, and then once the API is ready, you can use the real API. Also, you can actually even mock, even if you have the API, you can create a mock because it's just a file on the, I'll show you the file. You don't have to use a lot of resources loading data from the server. And also, I'd like us to look at the provider declaration because we need to declare the providers on the test file. Similar, the same way we declare providers on the module of a specific component or of a specific module. The way we declare the services on the providers, we have to declare the services of that specific component on the TS file, on the test file. So we are telling the module that when the service grant service is injected, it should use the grant service mock instead. The grant service mock is a dummy service that we created that returns dummy data to run the tests of the component. So let me show you what this grant service and this grant service mock are. So we have the grant here. This is where this is where the form is, and this is the component that has the service. So this is a simple HTML with a ng4 that gets a list, an array of grants. This is the array of grants. So we are fetching the grants from this grant service. You can console log the grants. Just a simple array. Ooh. What is happening? So this is the array that we are getting from our mock. I don't know if it's too small. This is the array we are getting from our mock service and generating it on the template. So let's now see how we are going to set up the providers on the service file, because that's the tricky part I've found. Well, when creating tests for a component that has services. So this is the service, this is the spec file for this component. This is the component that I've just shown you. we are getting this array and displaying it on the template. So similar to the other instances, we declare all the components and then if you have services, you must have this section. If your component has services, you must have this providers section. And for our component, we are getting our data from the grant service. But as I had told you earlier, we are going to use this mock service. So all these files, you'll have access to them. So the grant service, it's a simple service. The service, this is the array of grants that you are getting. And for the mock service, this is the mock service. This is the mock service that we are going to use for our test. If you don't want to have a separate file, you can have this section down here. You can have it on the spec file, can have it down here. I've seen other people were doing that. So for this template, we are testing that. We are testing to see that a grant, once the component is loaded, the template should have at least one grant. And because we have the data already, I was just checking to see that we have this COVID-19 vaccine generated on the template. So once we run the test, so you'll see that so we've rendered one grant and should have one grant. So that was correct. Should render one grant, and the grant should contain this. I don't know. Yeah, it should contain this text. I don't understand this error. Yes, you'll see that our two tests have run successfully. And if there's a typo, I don't know what's happening here. I will look at it later. So that's basically it for the component that has services. The most important section is this. For a component that has services, you have to declare the service on the test file. So that's all for now. Down here you'll see all the places I got all this information. There's this guy, Fireship, Angular, the official site, and these two developers have some very good content too. Asante sana. Do you have questions?
Yeah. So just one question. First of all, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you for taking us through this. We know for sure, I personally, I can attest to this, is that testing is something that is very, very important for any software engineer, whether it's in Angular, whether it's in Vue.js, React, whether it's in Android, Flutter. These are things that this is something that cuts across all frameworks or all base cases when it comes to software development. And I'd like to say thank you for taking the time to take us through this. Personally, I've been struggling to really understand the concepts of unit testing or testing in general, but with this, at least has given me at least a glimpse of how it is, because sometimes I used to fear tests, but with some later on, I realized like I can't escape it. And yeah, I'd like to say thank you for that. So probably my question will be just very quickly on the spec file, spec the TS file. So does that mean that, for example, if it's say you're rendering the data coming in from the API, you're rendering it in, let's say, in terms of let's say a list, right? So how are you going to do that? Are you still going to use like a .native element and all that, or how are you going to do that?
You are rendering a list.
Yes, a list of, let's say, if it's names from that API or the user's API, for example.
I don't know if I've got you. Oh, you are rendering a list like
a list. Yes. So a list of, let's say, okay, let's say what? Okay, so let's say instead of now you rendering it in terms of, can you go to the HTML file, a template file?
This one.
Yeah, the grants.html file. You're rendering it in terms of paragraphs. Okay. All right. And then when you go into the spec.ts file, the test file, spec.ts. Yeah, and then when you move down to the place where the services is being made use of, yeah, down. Yeah, this part, HTML to render one grant. So this line, line 40, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Is this something that one should always look out at? For example, instead of it now being P, let's say if it's a list, that means it's gonna be LI. Like you really have to get into the DOM and pick whatever you want to look at, right? That's how it's supposed to read.
I get you now.
Yeah.
For a list, it will be the same, but now this will be LI instead of a paragraph. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Sure. And then just back in the TS file, the spec.ts TS file. The provider's part. Provide grant service and then use class grant service mock. So wait, the use class, right? Is it the name of the service or what is it exactly? What is grant service?
Grant service mock is a mock of the grant service. It's not a duplicate, an imposter. A
Okay.
mock. And what do you call it? What's another name of a mock? It's a
Okay. What does it contain?
This is the mock.
Okay.
This is the mock.
Uh-huh.
So it's just it shows you exactly how the service looks.
Uh-huh.
So like for this is the service, but if it was here I've just had quoted an example, but if it was a service that's in production, it will be URLs.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So it's is it like a must for you to have the mock file so that at least your test can see, okay, how does the data come in from the API and all that? Is it a must that you created?
It's not a must for you to have the mock. There is another implementation using Jasmine. Yeah, and I've shared it on the resources. I've shared it. I've shared it. This link. You can use Jasmine through here instead of mocking. Jasmine has more features that you can use to mock a service. You can use it for. There's also another. You can use it for the routing. There's I've forgotten how it's called, but there is a lot you can do with Jasmine. Yeah.
Okay, sure, no problem. Anyone else has a question?
Hi Wayne, I wanted to ask if I could just chip in on some of the questions you asked, if that's okay with you and Joel.
Yeah, it's totally fine.
Yeah, so if we could just go back to the code.
Yeah. Which section?
Yeah, just that on the test. So the use class part, I had Wayne ask a question about that. So I think from my understanding, just the way Joel has said, it's definitely a mock of the service that you are providing for it. But sometimes you can even think about it as some sort of renaming of the service, so that you can be able to use grant service mock in the file instead of just grant service. But even you don't have to use class. Like you can always just provide grant service only and just use grant service, and it will still work the same way. And you can also, instead of even having to provide the service up there, you can always, like the way Joel said, use Jasmine to just inject it in the test case. Then there was the first question. I've forgotten. What was your first question?
The other one was I think the DOM, for the DOMs. So when
Yes. So in his service currently, in Joel's service currently, he has data, right? He has mocked data that is supposed to be received from a service. So I think that is why he was able to check whether that is what is being rendered in the HTML, right? But then if you are making an actual API service call, you wouldn't need to say .to contain or anything. You can always, in the service for that particular component, mock the kind of data that you want to receive from the service, so that when you're writing the test for that service, you're just telling it to expect data that looks like the mock data that you've provided in the test. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you don't have to use .to contain all the time when you're writing a test from like a service. I think he used .contain because that data is fixed on the service, and that should work just fine.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Okay.
I think that's, yeah, I think those are my thoughts on the questions that you asked. So back to you, Joel.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Last
Yeah.
thing, sorry. So there was this part for submitted is equals to false, and then you want to transform it to true on click. There was a question about that, Wayne. Yeah. So in that sort of situation, so if you can just go to that file,
This one.
not the test one, but not the component itself.
Okay.
So up there we have submitted is equals to false. I think that is you've declared it up there, right? Yeah, okay. So we have submitted is equals to false, and then let's assume on submit, we want this dot submitted to be true. So we can go to the component, and then we can go and now sort of call this what is it called? Call this method. So the same way we said component dot on submit, and then after that we can now come and say component dot submitted is equals to true, still in our test. So that means that we were going to transform now, since locally, or when the test is running, it knows it false. When it gets to that test case, we are now able to transform the submitted part from false to true, and then that makes the test run. So yeah, especially in like some of these functions that have so many lines of code, you'll realize that there are some things like maybe say this dot submitted, maybe you have a loader, right? And you want it to load. Maybe you have so many things that are supposed to happen inside like one like function, right? So you can be able to test all of them by just calling them by saying component dot loading is equals to true, component dot hidden is equals to true inside those test cases, and they will pass. Yes, that's it.
All right. Awesome.
Thank you.
Anyone else was a question
Question, comment?
or comments? Okay. So if there's no question, no comment, or any remark, I'd like to say once again, big thank you to Joel, who was our guest speaker today, taking us through unit testing. Thank you for all of you as the attendees who took the time to attend this session. This session is going to be recorded, so you can definitely still refer back to it whenever you want to. The video will be up by tomorrow afternoon, so be on the lookout. If you're not aware, we have a YouTube channel, dubbed Angular Kenya, where you can get all the content that we've been having since our inception. So starting from beginners in Angular to working with template-driven forms, reactive forms, NGRX, RxJS, you name it, even building NPM packages. We've actually built NPM packages here in one of our sessions. And even today, having a session on testing. Of course, this is something that we'll definitely have at least even if Joel can come back again and do another session, probably digging deeper, or as you can see also, Cynthia is good at this, so we can definitely have her taking us through one of the sessions on testing. I know testing is broad, so we're definitely going to have more sessions on this. But be sure to just check out our videos. And of course, follow us on Twitter, where we provide information with regards to the community and all that. And without much further ado, I'd like to say again, thank you, and I wish you all a Merry Christmas. We'll be breaking, as a community, we'll be breaking for Christmas, for the holidays until next year in January, where we'll be having, I can't really say for sure, but just be on the lookout for our session. But we're going to have a session, I think it's going to be on the, I'm not sure if it's the 7th. It's actually, yes, on the 7th. Yes, 7th of January. So be on the lookout for that. Yeah, unless there's nothing else, I'd like to bring this meeting to a close, and thank you very much and have a good night.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. And Joel, please share with us your details so that at least people can know who you are, what you do, and all that. They will definitely share with them. If you have probably closing remarks, if you, anything you'd like to say.
Merry Christmas.
All right.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas,
Joel.
everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, Joel, sorry.
I'm Joel Machango everywhere. Joel Machango.
Thank you very much, Joel. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.